দ্য বিজনেস স্ট্যান্ডার্ডের মানি ফ্লোতে আপনাদেরকে স্বাগত জানাই। আমি ফারিয়া তাসিন, আর আজকের অনুষ্ঠানে আমরা আলোচনা করব বাংলাদেশের অর্থনৈতিক দৃশ্যকল্প নিয়ে। বাংলাদেশের অর্থনৈতিক উন্নয়নকে ঘিরে আমাদের সবারই কিছু প্রশ্ন আছে। ফর এক্সাম্পল, বাংলাদেশের ইনফ্রাস্ট্রাকচার ফাইন্যান্সিংয়ের জন্য সর্বোত্তম উপায় কী? বাংলাদেশের বন্ড মার্কেট কিভাবে গড়ে উঠতে পারে? ফরেন এক্সচেঞ্জ রিজার্ভ অপটিমাইজেশনের জন্য এক্সচেঞ্জ রেট কিভাবে ম্যানেজ করা যেতে পারে? এসব প্রশ্নের উত্তর খুঁজতে এবং আলোচনা করতে আমাদের সাথে আজকের অতিথি আছেন লুৎফি সিদ্দিকী। তিনি ন্যাশনাল ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ সিঙ্গাপুরের অ্যাডজাঙ্ক্ট প্রফেসর এবং লন্ডন স্কুল অফ ইকোনমিক্সের ভিজিটিং প্রফেসর ইন প্র্যাকটিস। তিনি মেম্বার ওয়ার্ল্ড ইকোনমিক ফোরাম গ্লোবাল ফিউচার কাউন্সিল ফিসকাল এবং মনিটারি পলিসির। এর আগে তিনি ক্যাপিটাল মার্কেট ডেভেলপমেন্ট এবং ইনফ্রাস্ট্রাকচার ইনভেস্টমেন্টের কাউন্সিলে ছিলেন। তিনি কাজ করেছেন ডয়েচে ব্যাংক লন্ডন, বার্কলেস ক্যাপিটাল এবং ইউবিএসএ। এখন চলুন আমরা সরাসরি প্রশ্নে চলে যাই। থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ লুৎফি ভাই ফর কামিং টু আওয়ার শো।
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So we can see a lot of changes occurring in the global economic landscape. For example, the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of America, is going for quantitative tightening, the first time in many years. So what kind of implications will this have on the world economy, and how is it going to affect Bangladesh in particular?
Yes, these are extraordinary times from a global perspective. The US Federal Reserve has presided over quantitative easing, monetary loosening now for well over a decade. Interest rates have been at or around zero. They've been printing money to such an extent that their balance sheet is about 10 times the size of what it used to be when they started the exercise. In Europe, the European Central Bank have had negative interest rates now for 7 or 8 years. Japan has had negative interest rates. Switzerland has had negative interest rates. So to turn that around and go for positive interest rates and hike interest rates in clips of 0.75% each time, it's a massive turnaround exercise, which has never been tried before. And every time they've tried that in the past, it has resulted in huge volatility in global financial markets. But they have to do it this time around because of inflation in the real economy. And as you know, there's been a confluence of supply side and demand side factors that's caused inflation to accelerate. There was pent up demand after a couple of years of lockdown, so people want to go out and buy, but supply constraints, partly because of the tragic war in Ukraine, energy prices, food prices up, but also extended lockdowns still happening in China, which has also created supply bottlenecks. So they'll have to tame global inflation, which is why they're having to do this exercise, which has to be a precision surgical operation, not easy to do. My own view is that they will induce a recession. They will have to contract demand quite dramatically. My hope is that they can do it fairly quickly so that inflation and inflationary expectations can come down, and so that this is a short-lived recession. It has huge implications for countries outside of the mainstream global financial markets. Take Bangladesh, for example. We have very little control over these factors, so we are price takers when it comes to these things.
Definitely.
But the implications are not straightforward. On the one hand, if Western demand is weak, it means that they're buying less of my exports. On the other hand, if Western demand is weak and it causes energy prices to go down, that lowers the cost of my imports, so good and bad. On the one hand, if interest rates go up in the US, it usually means less capital coming into emerging markets. On the other hand, if it's seen to be the case that Western assets are overvalued without much upside from there on, if you are an emerging market with good fundamentals and a good case to differentiate yourself, this might be a good place to be in. So it's a balancing act. For policymakers, you have to be agile. For here in Bangladesh, I have a lot of sympathy for example, the monetary policy authorities who are having to raise interest rates and curb demand on the one hand, on the other hand, not raise it so much that you tip you create credit defaults at an unprecedented rate. Because as you know, the local banking system relies on a fairly small number of very large borrowers, and there are linkages within the financial system, so there is systemic risk in going too far too soon. So it's a balancing act. What I would say is that all of this is risk management in response to what's going on in the global economy.
Right.
We shouldn't lose sight of building risk resilience, which is more of a front foot, structural, strategic set of policies that I think the country needs to accelerate, even while it's managing the risk management challenge. Because
Right.
ultimately it's resilience that gives you protection against unknown scenarios and gives you the ability to grasp opportunities as they arise in a very nimble way.
Right, that has been very insightful. So we'd like to talk a little bit about infrastructure financing. So we have an estimation which says that Bangladesh's infrastructure financing requirements are at $608 billion, which is a huge amount of money. So first of all, what are the globally recognized solutions for infrastructure financing that Bangladesh can take advantage of?
Yes, so there are several formats in which infrastructure can be funded. But firstly, I just want to underscore the importance of infrastructure for a country like Bangladesh, where you have the baseline fundamentals already in place.
Right.
It's just that you can turbocharge it by creating economic corridors, connectivity, whether it's physical connectivity, digital connectivity, or building soft skills, for example, that allow people to communicate better, building efficiency and productivity through that manner. So I think there needs to be, and there probably is, a wide acceptance that infrastructure investment is an unambiguous positive at this stage. The second thing in my mind there is no question about is that given the scale of investment required, the numbers that you just mentioned,
Right.
you need involvement of private capital and you need involvement of foreign capital.
Definitely.
So foreign private capital need to come in. And that is easier to say than to do, because you're talking about creating an investment climate, you're talking about an environment, an ecosystem of confidence and trust. These are long-term commitments.
Right.
So you need to be sure of the socio-political context that you're investing in, so that the upfront investment that's going in now and the potential for revenue 20, 30 years down the line,
Right.
that is assured. So it needs to be a holistic approach to it. But I think the fundamental story is strong.
Right.
With the right packaging. It should be possible to crowd in a lot of infrastructure investments.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'd like to talk a little bit about the capital market in Bangladesh. We know that the bond market currently in Bangladesh is at a very nascent stage. So first of all, what are the advantages that businesses, as well as the country overall, can get from the development of a bond market, and what is the best way with which it can be developed?
Right. So as a country develops, you need a wide variety of sources and instruments of capital. It shouldn't just be about bank finance. It shouldn't just be about leasing companies,
Right.
or just the stock market, or just private equity. So bond markets help you complete and enrich the variety of sources. But particularly with bond markets, you create the ability for savers to save for really long extended periods. In the technical term, as you know, is it extends the yield curve.
Right.
So you're able to invest in for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And this is not only useful for foreign investors, but domestically, if you want to build your insurance business, life insurance business, privately offered pension funds business, all of these rely on an extended yield curve. And just very generally speaking, you can widen the net of inclusion. More people can take part in insurance services, in pension services, in banking services, in credit services, if there is an ability for example, banks or non-bank financial institutions to tap onto the bond market as part of their risk management vehicle. So it's a very powerful source of capital in an ecosystem. But the ecosystem part is extremely important. This is an elite sport. This is an adult sport. You don't want to go into a bond market without fully being aware of what it means. It means a lot more discipline that you would need in the equity market. Bonds are known as fixed income instruments for a particular reason. Investors expect to be paid on the day, at the time that they're expected to, that it says you should pay. You cannot shout at investors. You cannot exert political pressure on them. You can't reschedule and say this is not a default. So you've got to go in with your eyes open about the risks and the commitment for it. There are some countries that have done very well using the discipline of bond markets to professionalize, to further professionalize the financial sector. And there's some other countries that have basically blown up because they couldn't handle the ambient requirements of a bond market. So, but having said that, I frankly don't think Bangladesh has a choice, given the growth in the underlying economy, given the graduation to the next level of development. You need a bond market. So the sooner you're able to train and educate and build awareness amongst all the players in the ecosystem, from the auditors to the board governance to the analysts and the investors themselves, the more you're able to build that ecosystem, enrich it, train it, the quicker you can do it, the better. But there are new avenues. So, for example, green bonds, sustainability limit. There's a tremendous amount of demand for those assets. If you're able to take some projects that you have in this country and make them investable through the bond market.
What would be a few examples of these projects for green bonds?
It could be, for example, the plethora of solar projects that you're engaged in. There are other bonds that you could have that are geared towards social impact, whether it's education, whether it's women's participation. So you have to define the impact that you're going after. And so the money is given targeted towards that outcome.
Specific aspect.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the concerns surrounding the foreign exchange reserve. Now, although the foreign exchange reserve stands at 42 billion and it's enough to cover about 6 months of import payments, there's still a lot of concerns surrounding it. So on one hand, we have the global price hike. On the other hand, we have sluggish remittances, which is actually exerting a pressure on the forex reserve. So first of all, how much of this concern do you presume is valid? And secondly, going forward, what is the best way that Bangladesh can manage its exchange rate?
Right. So perhaps I'm not as concerned as some other people are. Just for context, the annual remittance that Bangladesh still receives is greater than the stock of reserves that Bangladesh had about 10 or 11 years ago. So that is the scale to which where we are. Now, of course, import demand is high, so you need the money. But it's not a trivial stock of reserves that you have right now. Secondly, the currency depreciation that people seem to be concerned about, which is true against the dollar, is not true against the pound, not true against the euro, not true against the Japanese yen. The Bangladesh taka, the last time I checked, is actually either static or stronger versus these currencies compared to the beginning of the year. Having said all of that, it does need to be managed with an eye on all of the factors, because if you lose confidence in the currency market, then a drain can accelerate very quickly. And because the market is still controlled, you will not see symptoms of losing confidence in the market. You will see it in the proxies, what is being leaked out in the unofficial sector and so on. So you've got to keep an eye on any measures of losing confidence. And if I could just elaborate on one thing, apart from the macro challenge, which I appreciate is a challenge and I have a lot of sympathy for the central bank, at a micro level and the day-to-day, we should not be scoring own goals. And the example I wanted to give was, I don't know if you're aware, there is these US dollar NRB bonds for non-resident Bangladeshis, so people like me to be able to invest in. And quite a lot of people, myself included, we've invested in those from the days when reserves were really low. It's not easy. It's a paper bond. There's no digital way of doing it. You have to sign on both sides.
So it's all manual.
It's, to my knowledge, it's still quite manual. A few years ago, I think in the middle of the pandemic, I got to know that there's a ceiling on the amount that you can put in. So the message I got was take your money out. So again, doing the paperwork through the pandemic, I couldn't come in at the time through DHL and so on and so forth. Got the money out, put it in to a local bank for 1 day or so before taking it out, and you get taxed on the amount that you put in there as well for a day. But today, the central bank is saying, we'd like you to bring the money back in. because we need the reserves. Now, I understand a few years ago, they probably thought the interest rate was too high, they need to bring it. They could have brought the interest rate down. But the money was sticky. There was no way that we would have taken it out.
Exactly, it was there.
Having taken it out, now to be told, please bring that back in, it's not that easy.
Right.
And this is, to me, an example of an unnecessary own goal at a micro level, not at a policy level.
Right. Okay, I see. Let's talk a little bit about some of the geopolitical changes that are occurring right now. For instance, the Russia-Ukraine war. So what kind of implications do you perceive it can have on Bangladesh?
So the geopolitical context before the war erupted in Ukraine was the decoupling, the potential decoupling between China and the US.
Right.
So for about 25 years until then, we've had a straight line increase in globalization and global integration. Now it looks like we're going to have more separation between the two worlds, and you really have to be careful about being aligned too much on one side or the other. And I believe Bangladesh does a very good job of balancing the various sources of capital, unlike some other countries that have veered too close to one versus the other, whether it's Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and some other countries in Latin America. I see, just casually observing, this project is with the Japanese, that's with the Chinese, this is with the US, that's with India. You can see that there is a distributed, that old foreign policy maxim that Bangladesh has had, friendship to all, malice to none, in a pure diversification of sources of capital point of view,
Right.
I think is being done well, and that needs to continue. The other side to this is there are opportunities that Bangladesh should and can grab.
Right.
The example I would give you is, I think it was 2 years ago, when it became very clear that American, Japanese companies wanted to bring some of their production facilities out of China. So they
Right.
were not reshoring back home, they wanted another country.
Right.
It's a China plus one strategy. A few countries, Vietnam, I believe Thailand, Philippines, they stood up task forces immediately.
Right.
They issued time-bound temporary extra incentives, and they basically held the hands of investors so they could shift into
Right.
those places, whether it's Dell for computers, whether it's Nintendo, whether it's the healthcare equipment makers. That opportunity was pounced on very well.
Right.
So they could have said, oh, this is a geopolitical problem, but they looked at it as an opportunity and they executed on it.
We should definitely learn something from them. So
Probably. So again, I just want to oversimplify. I just want to clarify that a lot of these things are context specific, and because I don't know the specific contexts over here,
Right.
I don't think we can transplant other people's policies, but we should make observations
Right.
and just try and see if some of those could be done.
Could be done in Bangladesh, right? So on the context of that, let's talk a little bit about FDI, foreign direct investment.
Yes.
So if you look at comparator countries such as India, and then Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, we can see that they have persistently done better in attracting FDI. So what are some of the lessons that Bangladesh can learn from them?
Lessons they can learn, Bangladesh can learn from them, I'm not sure. Again, I'll just make observations and ask some
Right.
questions. The lessons are for people who know the Bangladesh context better than I do. But my observations are, you need to have absolute clarity that you want foreign investment,
investment, yeah.
direct investment. Because there can be no hesitation. Once you're asking people to make commitments, long-term commitments. This is not the same as a garments house going to the buying officer and saying, would you buy your next shipment from me?
Right.
This is a 5-year, 10-year set of commitments. So you need to really want it. 2, you need to have a few themes. What is the FDI for? What is the marketing jingle? Is it come here for cheap labor? I hope not. Hopefully it's for a few other things. So I'll give you randomly 2 possibilities. You
Right.
could say that we would like to attract investment in skills development and sustainability related investments. This is because there's a lot of, I think it will attract a lot of foreign capital, but skills make sense. We have the world's largest pool of 20-something-year-olds
Right.
in the world.
We're currently going through a demographic dividend.
That's right. So your median Bangladeshi is 10 years younger than the Thai or the Chinese or the Americans, and 20 years younger
Right.
than the Japanese or the Germans. So here's a pool. Come and put your training hubs over here. Train us, train your own people. Let this be the skills hub. The other is sustainability. We mentioned green finance, green transition, other aspects of sustainability. Again, we're going to invest here because we have the ability to leapfrog our infrastructure in such a way that we're not transitioning from necessarily high-emitting industries. We're creating new industries, and let's make them green to begin with. And this is the country that has performed the best when it comes to SDGs.
Right.
So if that has worked the social context, why wouldn't you do that in the economic context as well? And so you need themes. Usually there's three things with FDIs. You need some strategic themes that you can rally around. You need the ability to unblock blockages in the system, whether it's for foreign investors or even for domestic private investors. I don't think we have enough domestic private investment over here. There's public investment, but they can be more. And the third one is that agility we spoke about earlier, to pounce on themes when they occur. The example I gave you was for moving from China. The other one many years ago was when the movie Lord of the Rings was filmed in New Zealand. New Zealand saw it as an opportunity to attract tourism. They created a minister for Middle Earth.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That's very
just to be able to attract these. So you've got to be opportunistic about these. I guess the last point I would make is the people that you have deployed to go out and attract investment.
Right.
When I look across the countries that I have been involved in, I almost feel that you need two heads of an organization like BIDA. One who has the skills of a chief operating officer, who can look inwards, and when a project comes in, they're able to troubleshoot and remove all the bureaucracy and the red tape and all of that. Just get things done.
Right.
And for that you need a set of skills which you could only get here in this country. People like me, I can't even cross the road properly here, much less drive a car. But that chief operating officer, you certainly need it over here, and you have it over here. The other aspect of the role is to be the salesperson in chief, to be the marketing economic ambassador around the world, a deal maker. You're pitching, you're competing, you're building relationships with the CEOs and the chief investment officers of the largest organizations around the world. I've seen, in the case of Indonesia, for example, they had a former Goldman Sachs partner in that role. Others have done similar. Usually, if you have someone with one set of skills, you don't have the other. You need both.
Right.
And unless you have a real all-rounder like Shakib Al-Hassan, I think you need two people to be able to do that. But this is an important part. The messenger is as important, if not more important, than the message.
That has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Lutfey, for coming to our show.
Thank you for having me.
এই ছিল আমাদের আজকের আয়োজন। আবার আসবো একজন বিশিষ্ট অতিথিকে নিয়ে। চোখ রাখুন দ্য বিজনেস স্ট্যান্ডার্ডের মানি ফ্লোতে।